There are many hoops one must jump through to bring to life an on-stage production. In this three-part docuseries, we're going to take a look at just some of the many things the SMSU Theater Department goes through to entertain the public. In this first episode, we sat down with SMSU Theater professor Nadine Purvis-Schmidt as she talked about the months of planning she goes through before a student even reads a script. Let's start at the very beginning. I think people would assume that's auditions or the table read-through, but before even that, you have to choose the show itself, actually. So how long before opening night? And for reference, in this case, opening night is like October 20th, 2022. How long before that are you usually choosing the show you're going to do?
So we might start that conversation like around January, February, and then we're making our final decision sometime in April, usually.
So almost like 6 months beforehand.
Yeah, about 6 months before the first show. And then, of course, by the time we get to the show we have scheduled for next April, that's like a year in advance of that
I'm not a very big long-term planner. I don't know what I'm doing past December, and you guys probably have your shows picked out through all the rest of like 2024 at this point.
No, some universities actually will pick like even 2 or 3 seasons ahead, but just because we're trying to respond to a number of things, we usually just pick for the upcoming year.
How many scripts do you consider on average, would you say?
I would say in a typical year, we probably think about probably somewhere between 10 and 12 scripts. And that might be anywhere from just a quick, like, hey, what if we did this? To actually like digging into, some shows we're fairly serious about.
In this case, you've picked 2 shows, and we'll get a little bit more into that. But you have to say no to roughly about 10 to 11 of them. What's the longest you've ever considered a script without doing it? Like, how many years was one just kind of like on the bench?
Well, I mean, we all sort of have dream shows that are kind of still on the bench that we've just been waiting for our chance to do. But I guess maybe one of the, like a concrete example, one of the longest was the show we did last year, Personal History. That had been a show that we had considered back in 2015 when we did a show called We Are Proud to Present. And it was just kind of the kind of show that always stayed in the back of my mind like all those years. And so then we finally had the opportunity to do it. It had some COVID interruptions, but we did finally get to do a public
interruptions
performance
is probably
of that.
the nicest way to put that. You start thinking about the shows January, February, kind of lock it down in April. But the students that are going to be working on this aren't going to be around until another roughly 4 months, give or take. So what sort of things do you do to try and get a head start over that summer break?
Yeah, usually over the summer, we'll spend that time, of course, reading the script, a number of times. We might have some quick, just email or text exchanges, just quick sort of initial conversations back and forth about, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking. Do you think this could work? Usually doing some prep for what we want to do at auditions, if they're going to come up like the second week of classes, picking out what scenes you want people to read, things like that. Kind of the unknown factor is who are the new students who are going to be coming in, right? We don't always know. We always have people we didn't know were going to come or didn't know were going to audition turn up. And, we have new people, and that's always exciting and wonderful to see that and to have the new options that brings.
Do you kind of enjoy that challenge?
I do. Casting is one of my favorite things to do as a director. And it's funny because like the very first show I directed here, I was hired and part of the hiring was, and you will be directing Pippin, which is a musical. And just from getting to know the students that first semester, I had an idea in my head of like who I might thinking, oh, this person might be good for this person might be good for this. And then when I actually had auditions, I ended up like not really casting it that way. And so that kind of taught me an important lesson about it's good to think about like who your available pool is, but to be really careful about thinking of people in particular roles because I would say for me personally, it often does not end up the way that I might think.
I was going to talk about this later, but since you kind of brought up auditions, one of the things as I was kind of thinking about this, that I think is kind of a fascinating challenge is whenever you're coming up with any project, I think anyone will tell you this, no matter what the profession, the more time you kind of think about it or kind of plan it out, the better. However, with auditions and casting, that isn't really a luxury you have,
Right.
because the more time you think about it, yes, the better everyone will be placed, but then that's less time you have to rehearse.
That's
So it's
true.
kind of, you got to get it set as quick as possible, but as right as possible. So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that challenge, or do you ever see
Yeah.
that as something that's stressful or anything?
Normally, I don't find that stressful, because, like I said, casting is one of my favorite things to do. I really enjoy that. It's like solving a puzzle, fitting the right actor with the role. And it was, however, a little bit of a challenge with one of the shows that I'm directing right now, which is the Taming of the Shrew, because there are 16 characters in Taming of the Shrew. And because I was casting 2 shows, I only had 6 actors available to me after auditions that I could use for Taming of the Shrew. And then I recruited 3 more. So I was like, okay, I've got 9. So then I had to figure out.
So at this point, the only thing that can solve your problem is cloning, which unfortunately is not is frowned upon. But
yeah, but fortunately, in the summers, I work with as an actor with a small professional Shakespeare group, and they specialize in small group of actors, like 7 or 8 actors, playing all the roles in whatever Shakespeare play it is. And so each of us usually ends up playing usually about 3 roles, 2 or 3 roles. And so I had that experience. So I know this works and this can be done. And it's actually quite fun for the actors and the audience, because you get to see the sort of magic of somebody turning into another person. So I knew I had that. The trickier thing was which characters can I double with each other, meaning that they can't be speaking at the same time, right?
Yep.
Basically they can't be talking to each other, that kind of thing. So I had to do this really much more extensive scene and character breakdown than I normally do. It's on a legal size sheet of paper. It has all these, little X's and character names and stuff. There are a lot of things to consider when you're planning a rehearsal schedule, especially when you're rehearsing 2 shows in the space of 1. So I had everyone's audition sheets on which they listed all their conflicts, both their regular weekly conflicts and their special one-time conflicts. So that's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is dividing up the script according to who's in what scene. And we have 2 very different shows in that regard. I've got a relatively straightforward scene breakdown for the Taming, because there's only 3 people in the show. Taming of the Shrew was a little more complicated because I had hoped to cast maybe up to 12 people to play 16 different roles. And that was, by the way, after cutting some roles. There are actually more roles than that. But I only had 9 people to work with. So 9 people playing 16 characters. And so I had to do a really detailed scene breakdown to know who was on stage at the same moment, to know what roles I could have the same person playing. So the wide black lines are the scenes as they're actually broken down, as Shakespeare broke them down. And then all the little columns are subdivisions that I did. In theater, we have a term called French scenes, which means you break up the scenes by entrance or exit of a major character. And so these are basically French scenes with a few extra tweaks. So you can see how many of them there are now. It took me a whole legal size sheet of paper to get that. So after going through the actor schedules and breaking down the script, then I create a rehearsal calendars really that look like this. In this case, for each of the casts, so it wouldn't be confusing for them, I have them separated out. So this is the Taming rehearsal schedule, and this is the Taming of the Shrew rehearsal schedule. Now, as we get closer to the show starting, then we have everybody called every night. And while I'm in one space, while I'm in the Fine Arts Theater working with one show, the other show is in the black box with the stage manager for that show. And they're running lines or running the show, whatever can be a productive use of their time as we approach opening.
Before we continue our conversation with Nadine, we're going to take a break and shine a spotlight on some of the future projects the SMSU Theater Department is working on. Let's get into the shows that you are directing that we're talking about here. And notice I am saying shows plural.
Yep.
So you're doing 2 shows. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so The Taming of the Shrew is one of Shakespeare's earliest comedies. Some people know the film 10 Things I Hate About You. That's a modern retelling of basically the same story. So in this play, there is a family. The dad has 2 daughters, Bianca, who's sweet and nice, and lots of people want to marry her. And then there's Catherine, who's what's called a shrew, meaning that she's kind of mean and angry and occasionally violent to other people. And so her dad is Baptista. He's finally had enough. He's like, okay, everyone wants to marry Bianca. Nobody wants to marry Catherine. I hereby decree that Bianca cannot get married until Catherine gets married. So some of Bianca's suitors go into disguise and enter her house as tutors for her and her sister so they can teach her Latin and music and stuff like that. And this new guy comes to town named Petruchio, and he's kind of finding his fortune, his future as an adult on his own now, and decides he wants to marry a rich wife. And his friend says, oh, have I got a wife for you? But I should warn you, she's really mean. And he's like, I'm up for this challenge, and she's rich, I'll do it. So, and so the rest of the play is how it works out between Petruchio trying to win over and also reform Catherine's behavior, and then also what happens with Bianca and all the various people 3 people who are trying to marry her.
And I remember one of the first times you were telling me about The Taming of the Shrew, I'm kind of thinking to myself, like, this sounds like it could be like an interesting reality show almost.
Yeah.
And then you kind of talked about,
Yeah.
that's almost kind of the attempt here with The Taming, which is,
Right.
get into a little bit about that.
The Taming is not a modern retelling of The Taming of the Shrew, but it's inspired by an idea in Taming of the Shrew, which is that when people are like this, always like arguing and mean and disagreeing with each other, that nothing productive gets done. And specifically in The Taming, it's about how that plays out in our political system in the United States.
Nothing, and probably nothing relevant to today, by the way.
Right. It's in fact even more relevant today. It was written in, I think, 2015, and it's actually even more timely today than it was then. And basically what it all comes down to is like we, the people, all of us, no matter what side we're on, we the people have the right and the responsibility to craft government that works for us today, right? That does what we need it to do. But the fun sort of way that happens is that Miss Georgia, who's in the Miss America contest, decides that she's going to basically drug and kidnap a conservative senator's aide and a liberal activist blogger. So she locks them in a hotel room together. Miss Georgia says, I'm not letting you out of here until you find a way to work together. And then through an unusual twist, there's an ether-fueled dream sequence where they end up back in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention.
Let's get into In Rep, because you are doing these these 2 shows over the same 2 weekends, but you're not playing both each day. It's kind of or just kind of get into that a little.
In rep means it's short for in repertory. So it used to be a really common way that a lot of theaters operated, which was that they would prepare, any number of shows, and then in their performance lineup, they would alternate them. And there's a few theaters that still operate that way, but a lot of places have sort of dropped that way of scheduling their shows. And at least in recent memory, and I think maybe always in our regular, school year season, we've never done that. And so basically, ours is just a straight alternating between the two shows. So we open on October 20th in the evening with the Taming. It's a Thursday. On Friday evening is Taming of the Shrew. On Saturday afternoon is the Taming. On Saturday night is Shrew.
So this was a common, you kind of mentioned it was a common practice, and then
yeah.
it's kind of died out. So you're kind of bringing it back
Yeah,
almost.
it's a good experience for one actor, Bryn Mongeau, who's in both shows. So it's a great experience for them to like alternate a show each night. It's an interesting experience for Laura Bradley, who's our assistant stage manager, who's also working on both shows. So it gives you that a lot of summer theaters still kind of work on this system, summer professional theaters, and so they get that experience of what is it like to like do one show one night, the next night, you might have, we are using some of the same things, but otherwise different costumes, different props, that kind of thing. Molly Green, a student, is also doing props for both shows. So we have a few people who are having that experience of the 2-in-1. Yeah.
Besides that, maybe, what motivated you to do these two shows simultaneously? Because it seems like it's difficult enough to put one show on stage, and granted, I'm not great at math, but doing two seems like it would double the difficulty, roughly.
Yeah, it does.
So what kind of motivated you to do both of these?
Well, these two together is because of the fact that one, that Shrew inspired Taming, so there was that neat connection. It also been about 5 years since we'd done a Shakespeare show, so we knew we wanted to do a Shakespeare. We also like our students to have the opportunity to do newer shows, written in the last, 10-ish years or so. And so this was a good opportunity to connect, to have a neat connection between these two shows. So when it comes to scripts that we're using for the show, so when we order a script from a play company, it comes like this. And this is by the wonderful Lauren Gunderson. Lauren Gunderson is an extremely popular playwright right now, one of the most produced playwrights in America right now. And so the script comes like this, which, as you can see, doesn't leave you a lot of notes to places to take notes or anything like that. So generally speaking, we'll make what's called a prompt book. So, and then I use this more as a guide for when we're rehearsing, so I can remind actors of certain things or ask them certain questions or know where to start and stop in rehearsal. Very common these days for Shakespeare plays to be cut, to run more in line with what modern audiences are most likely to relate to in terms of runtime. And so I did a cut of this script. So the Folger Shakespeare Library makes their text available to people to use. And so this was very handy because I could just go into the PDF version and I could do my cuts right in the PDF. For each of the actors, they have a copy of this, which is No Fear Shakespeare. And so the way No Fear works is that there is Shakespeare's text on one side of the page with the box around it, and then on the other side of the page is a plain English version, and along with some definitions of some words that might be unfamiliar. So it's not the end of the actor's research to figure out what they're saying, but it's a helpful aid to kind of give them the basics of what they are saying. One thing I've been working with the cast on is in each little segment, what's the main, what I call the nugget, like what's the thing we're taking out of this section. So since we're about 10 days out from opening these shows, I think we're in a good position. We have a little bit of an unusual schedule with these two shows because of fall break and because of taking fall break off, because ordinarily we would be doing tech over fall break weekend if we were following a regular tech schedule, which is where you do the tech rehearsals the weekend before you open. So we're actually adding in all those tech elements a week earlier than we normally would. So that's great for tech. I think it's a little challenging for actors because Normally, by the time you get to tech, actors are like fully confidently off book, and you add in those tech elements. So they are off book, but still not as solid as they would be if we were adding in the tech elements a week later. So I think everything's in a good position. It just feels weird to everyone because it's not the same flow we would have in a traditional schedule. I think some of the biggest hoops that we still have to jump through between now and opening is just navigating, shifting between, because now one group will be working without me while I work with the other group. And so it doesn't give me quite as much opportunity to fine tune some moments that I would have in a regular rehearsal where I was just rehearsing one show. So consequently, I'm going to have to call some people separately outside our regular rehearsal time to work on some things, just to get that all, where it needs to be. And also we've just lately, over the last week, just had a lot of people absent, especially from Shrew rehearsal for various reasons. We were missing like 2 or 3 people every night. We only have 9 people in your cast and they're playing 16 roles. Missing a couple of people is a big challenge. So we're playing a little bit of catch up in that, on that side of things. Certainly in this last 2 weeks, especially before opening, we really try to make a push to make sure everyone knows that the shows are happening, that we hope people come see them. We do have posters now, and we'll be doing some more things on social media. We're on the radio, and so lots of push just to hope that we fill some seats and get people to come see the show.
Curtains flying on this episode of Peek Behind the Curtain, and what we covered was just the tip of the iceberg. Tune in next week as we dive into the costuming and set design. And if you like what you saw, check out some of our other documentaries on this channel. And be sure to go and support the SMSU Theater Department this fall and winter.